Chapter 26, Section 3 and 4 of J.B. Bury's The Students' Roman Empire, Part 2. Recording by Chris Caron. The Students' Roman Empire, Part 2, by John Bagnell Bury. Chapter 26, The Principate of Hadrian, Section 3 and 4. Section 3, The Defense of the Frontiers and the Western Provinces. The Sarmatian races, which were separated from each other by the province of Dacia and Roxolani on the east and the Jazyges on the west, kept up mutual communication and formed a league against the empire after the accession of Hadrian. The immediate cause of the war is said to have been that the Roman government refused to continue the subsidy which Trajan had consented to pay to the king of the Roxolani. The barbarians probably invited Dacia, and Hadrian, as we have seen, was obliged to leave Rome shortly after his arrival, and take the field against them, 118 A.D. Although successful in this war, he consented to a compact by which he agreed to renew the subsidy claimed by the Roxolani, and the king of that people received Roman citizenship and became a Roman vassal. Recalled to Rome by the conspiracy of Nigrinus, Hadrian appointed Q. Marcius Turbo to a special military command over both provinces of Pannonia and Dacia, although Turbo was only of equestrian rank, and gave him the same title and dignity which the prefect of Egypt possessed. But Hadrian was not content with averting the present danger. He sought to guard against future invasions, on the one hand of Pannonia by the Jazyges, on the other hand of Mescia by the Roxolani, and with this view constructed lines of fortification. The new fortress of Traumus, Lycia, in the delta of the Danube, commanded the route of invaders coming through Bessarabia, and formed one of a number of ports along the Euxine coast: Odessus, Vama, Tomi, Kistenge, Trosimus, Tyrus at the mouth of the Dniester, Olbia at the mouth of the Dnieper, Ponticapium in the Tauric peninsula, between which constant connection was kept up by the Pontic fleet. Panticapsum was at this time under the government of a Sarmatian prince, who professed warm friendship for Hadrian and the empire. It is said that Hadrian, in order to protect the provinces south of the Danube from the chance of an invasion by way of Dacia, broke down the upper part of the great bridge which Trajan had constructed at Turnu Severin. The truth of this statement has been questioned, but it may have been found that the intercourse between the northern and southern banks of the Danube was still carried on chiefly by boat, and was little facilitated by the existence of one bridge, and the emperor may have determined to sacrifice it. Possibly he substituted a drawbridge. To him, perhaps, were due many of the forts which protected the valleys and passes of the eastern Carpathians. But though he regarded the province as outlying and insecure, he did much for developing its resources and Romanizing it. Under Hera began the settlements of veteran soldiers, and a vigorous prosecution of the mining works. The administration of Dacia was changed, 129 A.D., by its division, like Pannonia and Moesia, into two provinces, Upper and Lower Dacia, governed by legati. Hadrian busied himself equally with the defense of the middle Danube in Pannonia. It was here most conspicuously that he put into practice a new principle of investing with a municipal character the most important frontier stations, and combining civu with military life. This was easy, for not only did many tradespeople settle close to important camps, but the veterans, after they discharged, used for the most part to remain in the same place, and thus were formed town settlements, separate from the camp, and known as canbas or the booths. Trajan had tried the experiment in the case of Castra Vetera and Ulpia Noviomagus. Hadrian transformed into colonies the two headquarters of the troops of Lower Pannonia, Anticopa, which is now the capital of Hungary, and Myrsa, Esjeg, where the Drave flows into the Danube. In Upper Pannonia, the three chief stations at legions were Vindobona, Vienna, Conventum, Peronel, and Brigetto, Osnazi. These he converted into Mexican cities, as well as other stations of less renown. Vixenum oi Egyptius in Upper Mesca, and Augusta Vindelicorum IP Patia were treated in the same way. These changes were probably aggravated during Hadrian's visit to these regions in 121 A.D. It is also to be observed that he transferred a considerable part of the southern Pannonia to Italy, and colonized anew the Flavian foundation of Sicily on the Save. Thus, while he was providing for the defense of the empire, Hadrian was also carrying on the work of Romanization. As far as Regina Castra, Resenburg, it was only necessary to reinforce the natural defense of the Danube by a line of forts. Now the idea which Hadrian endeavored to carry out systematically was to supplement natural defences of water by artificial defences of wall. To him we may attribute with great probability the construction of the Hisman wall, which protected the corner between the Rhine and the Danube, and marked the lines transdanubianus of forts, which Hadrian now connected by a wall which can still be traced from the Danube, a little above Kelheim, to the lines Transianus near Weltslium. It is quite possible that part of the line of wall running southward from the main and bounding the Agri Decumatus may be also due to him, and not to the Flavian emperors. The Germans seem to have given no trouble in this reign. One tribe accepted a king appointed by the emperor. In his progress through Lower Germany, Hadrian founded Forum Hadani in an island close to the Batavian Lugdunum. The administration of the two provinces of Germany was charged. Hitherto, it will be remembered, their legati were only military commanders, and the civil administration was in the hands of the legatus of Belgica. Henceforward, Upper and Lower Germany have each a legatus possessing civil powers, but they are still financially connected with Belgica, insomuch as the Belgic procurator collects the taxes in the Germanics. In Britain, which he reached in 122 A.D., there is much to be done, and some cause for serious anxiety. Little hold could be kept on the lands beyond the Tyne, which Agricola had tried to conquer, and even south of the Tyne. The Brigantes, by no means wholly subdued, held out in their strong places. The Romans suffered most severe losses in continuous warfare with the Britons, and the 6th legion, which had been in the island since the conquest of Claudius, was annihilated. It was replaced by 4th Victrix, which had hitherto had its headquarters at Castra, important Roman position in the north. Hadrian took the field himself against the barbarians, but the great result of his visit to Britain was the elaborate system of fortification which he devised to facilitate not only defence, but also the extension of the province. For he did not surrender this design of occupying the northern half of Britain, as he had surrendered Trajan's annexations beyond the Euphrates. He did not intend to make the Tyne and Solway the limit of the province. To complete the conquest of a half-conquered island was a widely different project from advancing into the heart of a vast continent. It is uncertain how far we are to accept the statement of a contemporary historian that from an economical point of view Britain was quite useless to Rome, but the Roman government evidently considered that the acquisition of North Britain was politically, if not economically, desirable. Hadrian saw that this end could not be attained by a slow and methodical advance. Accordingly, a line of fortifications on an immense scale was drawn across the island from the Tyne to the Solway, and the remains of this construction constitute the most striking record of Roman dominion in Britain. The Roman wall. It used to be called I the Picts. Wall is a system of walls, 3 earthworks, fossils, and forts, connected by a road. On the east side, it began at Sagendinum, whose modern name, J. Wall's End, reminds us of the fact its western extremity was at Galanabanta near Bowness, on the Solway Firth. Its course was straight, and its entire length about 70 miles. It consisted of 3 parts: a stone wall, a series of stations connected by the road, and an earth wall. The stone wall on the north was from 6 to 8 feet broad and nearly 20 feet high. Turrets of rectangular shape occurred in it at unequal distances, at longer intervals about a Roman mile, were fortified gates, generally called mile castles. A fosse runs along the northern side of the wall. The earth wall, or vallum, on the south, consists of three parts itself, a single mound, a fosse, and a double mound. The single mound is on the north side of the fosse, which is about 30 feet broad, and the double mound is on the south. The distance between the vallum and the stone wall varies considerably, but it is on a rough average about 120 yards. The road runs between the stone wall and the vallum, and along it are situated, at unequal distances, 14 large camps, called pexcenturf, belonging to this line of camps, but situated at a short distance south of the vallum, are 3 others, so that we must count 17 camps as part of the system of fortification. The best preserved of these camps bore covicum, now called housesteads, and circuum, where the memory of the Roman site is retained in the name chesters. A long and continuous stretch of the stone wall may be seen at Borcovicum. The work has probably begun during Hadrian's visit to Britain, 122 A.D., and was executed under the direction of the legatus Aulus Platorius Nepos by the laborers of the 3 Britannic legions, 1st, 4th, 20th, while the other military service temporarily devolved upon detachments sent from Spain and Upper Germany. The auxiliary troops also assisted, and a large number of inscriptions bear witness to the part taken in the work by the various centuries and cohorts, and alas! Hadrian's connection with the wall is commemorated in the name of the second station on the eastern side, Pons Malai, Newcastle. There can be little doubt that some of the stronger positions which formed the sites of the camps had been previously occupied by Agricola and other commanders as detached forts. This consideration will help to explain the inequality of the distances between the stations. The significance of the wall cannot be appreciated if it is not observed that Brigantes were not yet thoroughly subdued, and that the continuous fortification was designed to serve as a barrier, hindering effectual communication or cooperation between the enemies to the south and the enemies to the north. With the wall as basis of operations, the subjugation of the northern tribes could be gradually effected, and this work was carried on by detached forts and camps, such as that of Birmingham, High Rochester, north of the wall. The line of the wall was crossed by roads leading northwards. Thus Whaling Street crosses it near Calerinum. This circumstance alone indicates that Hadrian's wall is not to be regarded as a frontier barrier, not intended to be passed against a foreign foe, but as a sort of huge elongated camp, established in a country which the Romans purposed to make their own. It marked a stage, but was by no means intended to mark the last stage in the conquest of the island. Of Hadrian's acts in Gaul, we only know that he showed great liberality in all the provinces. We have no record as to what cities he visited, except Namansus, Narnes, where he erected a basilica in honor of his adopted mother, Plotina. Crossing the Pyrenees, he spent a winter, 122 through 123 A.D., at Tarico, where he held a meeting of representatives of the Spanish cities, and made himself acquainted with the needs and wishes of the provincials. Of his visit to Sicily we only know that he ascended Mount Tina to see a sunrise. These internal provinces, the Gauls, the Spains, and Sicily, were prosperous, and had less need of empirical care than those whose borders were exposed to invasion, like Pannonia, Britain, and Africa. He visited the African provinces twice, in 123 A.D., on the occasion of a Moorish rising, which he quelled, and again in 128 A.D. Of his activity there we have many though slight traces. A new road was constructed from Carthage to Thevest, and having completed this work, under the direction of the legatus P. Motilius Secundus, the legion was established in a new permanent camp at Lampsacus. The object of this change was that the army should be nearer Mauretania, in which there was no legionary troops. In founding colonies, Hadrian seems to have been as active in Africa as he had been in Pannonia. Utica was raised to colonial rank. Ilion colonies were founded at thence on the coast south of Carthage, at Zama Regia and Lars in Numida, at Bonassa in Tingitanda. A new road was constructed from Cirta to the coast at Rusicade, Philippeville. These facts, among others known to us as entirely from inscriptions, illustrate the universal activity of Hadrian in all parts of the empire. Section 4. The Eastern Provinces. The progress of Hadrian through the Latin portion of the empire, as far as we can trace it, is chiefly marked by his measures for the defence of the frontiers. In the eastern provinces he had more room for manifesting and gratifying his personal tastes. There was no cause for apprehension on the oriental frontier. Parthia was afraid of Rome. The tranquillity was threatened. Some years cuter Hadrian's accession, but matters were smoothed by a personal meeting with the Parthian king. During his second visit to the east, the emperor held a friendly gathering of client kings and princes. He visited Chosroes and sought to maintain a good understanding with that potentate by sending back his daughter, whom Trajan had captured. A difficulty arose about 134 A.D., when Pharamond, king of Iberia, invaded Media. Vologeses, the successor of Chosroes, complained to Hadrian, who however refused to call his vassal to account, and even enlarged his kingdom. Vologeses was not strong enough to press the matter. The efficiency of the Roman army, trained under the new reforms, was made evident. At the same time, when the Alans threatened to invade Armenia and Cappadocia, Armenia was saved by the Parthian king, who gave the barbarians money. Cappadocia by the resolute attitude of its governor, Arrian, a capable commander, who however obtained more celebrity as a writer than as a general. Early attention of Hadrian to the military exigencies of the empire in the east is shown by the official tour of inspection round the Euxine Seine, which Arrian made by his orders, and wrote an account of his purpose, from which work he learned that Hadrian expected from his generals. No land was so much patronized, Hadrian, as Greece, which he visited twice. Almost every town of importance or ancient distinction was enriched by new buildings or gifts. At Corinth he built an aqueduct and baths. At Megara a temple of Apollo. Olympia was adorned with several splendid buildings, and a statue was erected there to the emperor by all the Greeks. He restored the horse racks, which had fallen into disuse at the Nemean games. At Mantinea he erected a temple of Poseidon, and engraved on the tomb of Epaminondas an inscription composed by himself. In the temple of Eros at Thespiae he dedicated the skin of a bear, which he had killed, with Greek verses of his own. In the temple of Hera at Argos he offended the goddess's favorite bird, a peacock of gold, the tail brilliant with precious stones. But it was Athens for which Hadrian showed a special predilection, both by his 2 long visits there and by his liberality in beautifying the city. He desired that Athens should once more be the capital of Greece, and his patronage called forth a sort of Greek Renaissance. He gave the Athenians the revenues of the island of Chaleudia, and the city, which in the time of Augustus had been called empty by Horace, soon became so flourishing that it surprised travellers by the size of its population. Hadrian adopted Greek dress while he resided at Athens. He presided at public games, and took part in the Eleusinian mysteries. He permitted himself to be elected archon, and fulfilled the function of the office. He spent his time in associating with the philosophers, sophists, and artists, and superintending the progress of the architectural works which he was constructing in the plain of the Lucius. Here a new Athens arose, which was called Hadrianopolis. It was disappeared, but its limit is still marked by an arch of triumph southeast of the Acropolis, on one face of which is inscribed Athens, the city of Theseus, on the other the city of Hadrian, not of Theseus. He completed the temple of Zeus Olympius, known as the Olympium, which Herei been designed on a vast scale by Penstratus, and left unfinished for 700 years. An inaugural address, on the occasion of its dedication, was pronounced by Polemon of Smyrna, a sophist famous for his eloquence. 15 of the 120 columns of this building still stand. But besides finishing the edifice, which had waited so long for its completion, Hadrian carried out an idea which the Greeks had dreamed of and striven after for centuries, but had never succeeded in realizing. This idea was the unity of Hellas. It was at length effected by the condescension of a stranger, when it had no longer any political meaning. Representatives of all the Greek cities, both those which were free, and those which belonged to the Achenian province, were constituted as a college of Panhellas, and met yearly in Athens. Their special charge was the worship of Zeus, Penhelianos, and Hadrian in a new temple, called the Pantheon, which was built in Hadrianopolis, and intended to serve in Greece somewhat the same purpose as the temple of Rome and Augustus served at Lugudunum. It was ordained that annual games should be celebrated close to the Panhellenion, and on this occasion an offering was made to Zeus, the deliverer, at Platsea, in memory of the Greeks who fell there on the anniversary of the battle. The 4th day of Bodrimon, Hadrian himself received the divine title Olympian. In the honor of enlarging Athens, a distinguished share was borne by the accomplished and wealthy rhetor Herodes Atticus. He built a bridge over the Ilissus in the new town, and constructed a stadium, which he covered with Pentelic marble. On one of the hills which overlooked it he raised a temple to Fortune. He also founded a library, which Hadrian surrounded with splendid porticos. In the Asiatic provinces there are many traces of Hadrian's progress. Everywhere he came to the relief of cities which had been injured by earthquakes. Everywhere he appeared as a restorer. To Smyrna, the Athens of eastern Greece, the home of his friend Polemon the sophist, he was specially gracious. At his instance a new gymnasium was erected there by subscription, and we still possess the list of subscribers at Ephesus. He raised a temple to it is called Kavovic Rifik Ephios, and Augustus permitted to be held at Argos, to have Rivitoli in inscriptions. It will represented only the subject, not the free. He remembered that the Koi, which Greek cities, Roman fortune, at Cyzicus, a temple of imposing size was erected in his honor, and the famous rhetorician Aretaces was engaged to pronounce an oration of the day of its consecration. This speech is preserved. Trajan had placed Bithynia temporarily under imperial legatus. Hadrian made this arrangement permanent, and confiscated the Senate by transferring Pamphylia to its control. In Bithynia he pursued his favorite pastime of hunting, and founded a new town called Hadrian's Chase, Hadrianorthus, at a spot where he slew an enormous bear. He visited the Troad, and beheld the places where the story of the Iliad was enacted, places which might have a peculiar attraction for a Roman who placed any faith in the tales connecting Roman with Greek antiquity. At Trapezus he had a fancy to look upon the sea on the same spot where Xenophon's 10,000 had cried, Thalatta, Thalatta. He was little pleased with the luxurious city of Antioch, and the inhabitants, always known for temper of insolence, seem to have given him some offence. He is said to have contemplated breaking up Syria into 2 provinces, in order to reduce the importance of Antioch. He did much for the development of the recently formed province of Arabia. He visited Palmyra, on the border of the desert, gave it the rank of a colony, and the privileges of Ius Italicum, and adorned it with new buildings. Both this city and Petra assumed the title of Hadriane. From Arabia he passed into Egypt, 130 A.D., which he entered at Pelusium. From this place he made an expedition to Mount Cassius, where the body of Pompey had been interred without honor, and erected a funeral monument to the rival of Caesar. He travelled through Upper as well as Lower Egypt, and visited the chief antiquities of the land. One of the wonders which travellers generally wont to see was the broken statue of Memnon, from whose limbs music miraculously issued at the hour of sunrise. An interesting reminiscence of the visit of the imperial party survives in some Greek elegiac verses, scribbled on a leg of the statue by the court poetess Balbilla, who was in the train of the Empress Sabina. A private misfortune befell Hadrian while he was in Egypt. Antoinine, a beautiful youth, to whom he was deeply attached, was drowned in the Nile. The story went that an oracle required either the emperor's life or the sacrifice of the object dearest to him, and that Antoninus deliberately drowned himself. The event excited general sympathy throughout the empire. Hadrian deified his lost favorite, dedicated a temple to him, and built Antopolis in his honor. Coins were struck with the head of the Antinios, and his statues were multiplied in the cities of Asia. The people of Alexandria alone scoffed at the grief of the emperor, although he had conferred many privileges and benefits on their city. Hadrian was repelled rather than attracted by Egypt, and was disgusted by its capital, if we may believe in a remarkable letter which he is said to have written to Servianus some years later, and which may really represent his impressions, although it can hardly have been written by him in the form in which it has come down to us. The peace of Hadrian's Principate was interrupted by only one really serious war, another revolt of the Jews. Since the destruction of Jerusalem, theological schools had been established in Jonibe, Tiberias, and Lydia, to keep alive the knowledge of the law and the orthodox Jewish religion. The most famous doctor at this time was Akiba, to whose name strange legions were attached. He led his revival of Judaism, and kept alive the hopes of his people to recover Jerusalem and establish a Jewish kingdom under the Messiah, who was expected to come. As long as these hopes were fostered, the Jews were a dangerous element in the empire, and their rising in the last year of Trajan gave Hadrian a lesson. He resolved to annihilate their hopes by founding a military colony at Jerusalem, from which the Jews could be entirely excluded. The new city was called Aelia Capitolina. Pagan altars were erected. There the temple of Jehovah had stood. Hadrian also conceived the idea of eradicating Judaism by forbidding the rite of circumcision. Such measures drove the Jews to despair, and they rose in arms. The priest Eleazar, and a bold and able fanatic, who received the name of Bar Kokhba, a son of the war, placed themselves at the head of the rebels. 131 A.D. It seems that Jerusalem, where the Romans were beginning the foundation of the new city, was captured by the Jews, and had to be retaken. The governor of Judea, Tineius Rufus, and the governor of Syria, Publicus Marcellus, proved unable to cope with the insurgents. The kmerline himself, who had just left Syria for the west, returned hastily to the scene of action, and finally committed to the conduct of the war to an able commander, Julius Severus, who was then legatus of Britain. The war, waged chiefly in Samaria and Idumea, was protracted for 3 years, but Severus took fortress after fortress, and with the fall of Bether, a fortress not far from Jerusalem, and the death of Bar Kokhba, the struggle was at an end. No mercy was shown. The old doctor Akiba, who has been the life and soul of the rebellion, was torn in pieces with hot pincers. Judea was almost depopulated. It was decreed that no Jew should set foot in Aelia Capitolina except once a year, and henceforward the province was called, not Judea, but Syria Palestina. Julius Severus received the triumphal insignia, and it was the last occasion on which they see conferred. Henceforward victorious generals were recognized by the erection of their statues in the Forum of Trajan. Hadrian permitted the soldiers to greet him as imperator, the only occasion on which he accepted that military honor. End of chapter 26, section 3 and 4. Recording by Chris Caron, Ham Lake, Minnesota.